morning, East Coast. Good afternoon, Israel, and shalom to the rest of the world. I am Jonathan Conricus, filling in for Jonathan Chanzer. Welcome back to the FDD morning brief. As always, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, almost no matter what. This is where you will find excellent analysis of things that are going on. It is day 756 of the multi-front war still going on in the Middle East, around Israel. And welcome back to the morning brief. Today's guest is a friend of mine and colleague. His name is Advocate Gadi Ezra. He is the former head of the Israeli Public Diplomacy Office, the office in charge of communicating on behalf of the State of Israel. He's a legal scholar, a paratrooper with combat experience on the ground, and someone who I think, and you'll find out very shortly, has a unique perspective on strategic communications and the battle of the narrative. He will be with us shortly, and I'll give you my 2 cents of the current situation, and as always, your headlines before that. What we're seeing in Gaza is that Hamas is really pushing the envelope. I think they understand clearly that there is a lot of leeway, a lot of pressure applied on Israel by the US and other countries to make this deal work. Hamas understands that and is applying pressure. It is delaying and violating the agreement as they see fit. Last night, 2 bodies of murdered Israeli hostages were returned. Both of them were taken, abducted alive on October 7. Both of them murdered in Hamas captivity. And as of now, there are 9 bodies of murdered Israeli hostages remaining, 2 bodies of foreign internationals. And according to Israeli assessments, at least half of those bodies are in Hamas's control, and Hamas has access to them. And that is, of course, in big difference to what Hamas claims, that they don't have control over all of the bodies, and that is the reason for the delay. Another interesting development is that Israel issued a very clear warning with American and Qatari coordination and approval beforehand to Hamas to remove all of its fighters that they have deployed underground on the Israeli side of the yellow line or the ceasefire line. And Israel issued that warning yesterday. The ultimatum has expired. And what that means is that if Israeli intel will indicate that Hamas terrorists are still inside tunnels under Israeli forces, probably preparing to conduct attacks, if Israel understands that they're still there, Israel will take active measures, kinetic measures. And I think it's very important that a lot of people are not aware of the different tactical situation. For almost 2 years, Hamas fought using their tunnels, and they did so with almost impunity because Israel was limited from using its capabilities in the tunnels out of fear of killing or wounding Israeli hostages. That is not the situation anymore. And I think that we will see a different tactical environment. And I don't envy Hamas terrorists in tunnels that the IDF will find out where they are and what eventually will happen to them. And the IDF and Israel is definitely gearing up for operations there. In Lebanon, up north, the war isn't over and things are definitely heating up. I think we can see frustration from Israel's side that Hezbollah is rearming, importing weapons from Iran and manufacturing locally and trying to re-establish themselves in southern Lebanon. Just a few hours ago, Israel struck another senior or another Hezbollah official in southern Lebanon on his motorcycle in the central part of southern Lebanon. One of many Hezbollah terrorists that have been struck since the ceasefire came into effect. And Israel is definitely ramping up communications, strategic communications regarding the situation in Lebanon. We heard the Israeli chief of staff issuing warnings, and we've seen the political echelon, defense minister and prime minister speak about it. A lot is happening behind the scenes, and I would advise that we all continue to follow that space regarding what's happening in Lebanon. Far from over. There's been good progress, but the Lebanese armed forces are probably not able to really disarm this foreign Iranian terror organization that has taken control of Lebanon. Hezbollah is doing its best to delay and obfuscate, and Israel is getting more and more frustrated with one thing clear. Israel is not going to return to the reality of October 7, where Hezbollah is capable of establishing itself along the border and carrying out attacks against Israel. Those are my 2 cents. Gaza and Lebanon, the bottom line being still a lot of action in store for us. Now, for the headlines, both of them are related to Iran. Headline number 1 is that 2 Russian mobsters, organized crime, were sentenced to 25 years in prison for plotting to assassinate the Iranian-American journalist, an Iranian-American journalist. The hitmen were working for Iran in a modus operandi that we've seen elsewhere around the world, used by the Islamic Republic. Rafat Amirov and Polad Omarov, they were convicted of agreeing to kill journalist Masih Alinejad in her Brooklyn apartment about 3 years ago. They were supposed to be paid $500,000 for the hit. For those of you who don't know, the brave Iranian dissident Alinejad, she's an activist. She campaigns for Iranian women's rights, and she has millions of followers and significant influence from social media accounts. The judge called the crime a terrible, terrible crime and said that the sentence should send a message that this kind of conduct won't be tolerated in the United States. If you ask me personally, I'm not entirely sure that this kind of sentence to these type of people will deter Iran from attempting to kill dissidents and freedom fighters on American soil again. But that's just my opinion. And this, of course, has been going on for years, and it's part of a broader Iranian campaign. Alinejad, they attempted to kidnap her in 2020 and 2021, and they've tried to assassinate her in July 22. Alinejad says that she has been forced to move 21 times, and that the criminals and the Islamic Republic of Iran have turned her life upside down. Let's hope that that situation won't continue. Continuing with Iran and bigger and strategic pieces, inspectors have detected movement at Iran's nuclear sites. Rafael Grossi, head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, he told the AP that inspectors have spotted renewed movement around nuclear sites where Iran's stockpiles of nuclear material, enriched material, are stored. Inspectors can't fully access the facilities, so they're stuck relying on satellite images. And Grossi also says that Iran still has uranium enriched to 60%, enough material to potentially build up to 10 nuclear bombs if Iran makes the decision to weaponize the program. And I think we pretty much know what their decisions are. A reminder here, Iran suspended all cooperation with the Atomic Agency after the 12-day war with Israel and the US in June. And Iran and the Atomic Agency signed an agreement last month to resume cooperation and restart inspections on Iranian soil in all of the facilities, but it hasn't been implemented yet. On that topic, UN sanctions have also been reimposed on Iran, as we know, the snapback, due to its lack of compliance to the JCPOA. And Grossi says that inspectors, they're in the country as of Wednesday, but, and I'm quoting, it would be incorrect to say that they are denying us access, them, the Iranians, but it would be equally wrong to assume that everything is fine. So an ambiguous Iranian situation unfolding, and of course at FDD, we will continue to monitor, even if the news go elsewhere and people forget the focus. FDD experts will be following this topic. And now it's time to welcome my friend Gadi Ezra, the former head of the Israel's Office of Public Diplomacy. Gadi, welcome to the show.
Shalom, Jonathan. Shalom.
Shalom, Gadi. Pleasure to have you here. And I think it's the first time that you're on FDD's morning brief, first time that our people and researchers and our supporters see you. I think it's a great opportunity for them to hear your unique perspective as someone who has both scholarly, academic, and real work, hands-on experience, who is someone who writes and fights, has even published books or a book on the topic, and is very active in everything that has to do with the battle of the narrative, soft power, and understanding strategic communication. So happy to have you on, and I hope that we'll have a meaningful conversation that people will find interest in. Now, based on your experience, Gadi, as someone who has really been at the top of Israeli strategic communications under Prime Minister Lapid and Bennett, someone who oversaw the attempt announced the efforts to coordinate Israeli strategic communications, a topic that many people have discussed over the years. I'd like you to give us an overview, a 30,000 feet overview of how you see the big pieces of challenges that Israel faces today in terms of the strategic communications and how it manages the battle of the narratives.
All right. First of all, I'll say it's an honor to be here and always good to see you, Jonathan. Need to understand our enemy's modus operandi. So from a 35,000 feet perspective, let's just view the very relatively successful campaign of the pro-Palestinian side in the past few years. A campaign that has two main objectives. The first is to label Israel as an apartheid state. And the second is to establish a Palestinian-run and operated solely on the kinetic domain, which you and I both have an extensive experience at as well, but in three simultaneous domains. The first is the political domain, or the international relations one. The second is the legal one. And the third is the information domain, or the perception domain as well. Campaigns or domains, they have three main target audiences. The first is the Israeli leadership. The second is the Israeli defense establishment. And the third is the Israeli general public. And there are good examples to show how they do it through, establishing media channels such as Al Jazeera, through chasing IDF soldiers at airports all over the world, through conducting protests in a very, unplanned way in the most popular vacation destination to Israelis, which is Greece. In August, while Israelis try to go on vacation on their summer break, and the purpose here is, of course, to signal to all of Israel that no place is safe and to mark everyone as one part. As opposed to that, our main challenge, and perhaps sin, if you'd like, is the lack of policy. And in this sense, Jonathan, policy is king. We have many wonderful spokesmen. 50% of this dialogue is one of them, and I'm not talking about myself. And they can sing the Israeli national talking points out of their sleep. The problem is that most of them are not operating as one coherent, synchronized system. And when you think about it, that's quite of a challenge, because all of our organs, for example, has very roughly three main target audiences. And there is an inherent exemplify that to the international audience. What we would like to achieve is legitimacy and say, hey, look how much the enemy hurts us. To the enemy, we would like to deter them, right? And to intimidate the enemy. To the Israeli public, we would like to develop resilience and pride in our soldiers. And this contradiction between those three narratives is not a bug, it's a feature, right? Someone needs to be up there and prioritizing target audiences and crafting policy. And when I'm saying policy, Jonathan, it's first and foremost look up to the National Security Council and the Prime Minister himself and ask them, what do you want, right? Because and from that, you need to decide who our target audience are, how do we talk to them, what are the messages, and who doesn't speak. Sometimes it's even more important to determine who doesn't speak in Israel, and you know this better than I do. And when do we stop? When do we say we have achieved our goal or haven't, which is very tough, because in the information domain, understanding when you have succeeded, especially if we're talking about the strategic lens rather than the tactical one. So all in all, that's just a very long way of saying that we currently operate with no policy or strategy in the information domain whatsoever. Therefore, it's really hard for us to cross the threshold of noise in the international media and achieve the hearts and minds we want to impact.
Thank you, Gadi. I agree. You focused on what the other side, you call them the pro-Palestinian, but we could of course debate if it's pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, BDS, Qatari, Muslim Brotherhood, Iranian, or all of the above combined. But leave that aside for a second. But you focused more on what how they're targeting the Israeli audiences. But of course, we've spoken a lot before about how they're really fighting in the global court of public opinion. And sadly, I think we'll share the perspective that they've been quite successful. Maybe an example of, just from the top of your head, how the other side has run a successful campaign, how they've been able to really shape policy through media operations lately?
So look, the outcome of us not having policy or strategy is that we operate the force in a very, I don't want to say poor way, but not in the most effective way. And our force buildup is lacking inherently, meaning no one is planning a decade ahead and, crafting projects. And one tactical example to illustrate that is the very successful hunger tire mechanism of distribution centers of humanitarian aid, right? And this is also an effort that you need to echo to the world, not just because you want to show how applying you are with the laws of war, but also to gain legitimacy and gain more time for both the operational level and the political level. Now, Hamas started its hunger campaign not on May or June or July 25th. It started its hunger campaign on October 23rd, an effort as an information effort as well. Therefore, we haven't, for example, prepared ourselves to echo our narrative properly, and we haven't responded properly to tactical incidents happening on the ground. Just to illustrate that, Jonathan, we haven't made sure that we have cameras to record all the crimes of Hamas there on the ground that tried to label those distribution centers that we're handing.
You're referring to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's excellent activities in southern Gaza, handing out more than 160 million meals to Gazans already without providing it to Hamas or to corrupt
And I
vendors.
thank you for clarifying that, because a lot of people don't know this because that wasn't properly echoed. And also, look, we know that Hamas tried to label those distribution centers as places of chaos. And, we haven't, for example, placed signs with the data that you're currently sharing that will be caught on the camera of every propagandist that labeled the packages. We haven't released messages in a very coherent and a persistent time to convey our idea. And when things happened on the ground, it took us a long time to react because we've seen those incidents as an operational incident rather than information incident that we need to close our circle on very, very
quickly. As opposed to that, we saw that Hamas and their supporters in international media looked at things first from an information perspective and second from a reality on the ground perspective. And where reality on the ground was that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was handing out hundreds of thousands of meals every day, and most of the time, 99% of the time, in very orderly and respectable fashion with zero incidents and zero casualties, definitely much better than how the UN system was distributing aid. Yet the public perception was one of chaos, and the media onslaught on the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and on Israel's humanitarian efforts followed. And that's, of course, another, I'd say, sadly, win for the other side that probably could have been either lost less badly by Israel or perhaps even won. But let's move on into beyond the realm of information and look a bit further. You say, and I agree, that strategy and policy is needed for communications. Nobody would, I think, agree more than I do. But let's look a little bit at perhaps the most important relationship that is shaping reality has been at the higher levels of Israeli government. How do you assess the current situation, and what's your sense for the future in terms of the situation on the ground, whether it's regarding Iran, the situation in Gaza, and its legal framework and how the ceasefire is going to be implemented, the International Stabilization Force, and what's happening in Lebanon. So any of those, and you're a seasoned interviewee, you will pick whatever you want of that broadcast.
I'll begin by saying great questions, Jonathan. Look, the first thing that pops to mind is the following. Look, we in the Israeli, the White House, right? But that's, in my perspective, Jonathan, a very short-sighted perspective, because our main problem is the Israeli relations with the deeper streams in America. We are losing the younger generation, and that's an understatement, right? Look at the last Harris poll, for example, that indicated that among the younger generation, the age group of 18 to 24, 6% of the younger generation in America, both Republican and Democrats, support Hamas, support a terror organization that has committed the worst atrocities against Jews and non-Jews, by the way, since the Holocaust, right? So that's the first thing that pops to mind. Now, if we are looking at tomorrow rather than 5 years ahead, one of the key challenges right now, when you mentioned the stability force that's going to define a very clear mandate to this force, led by the United States of America. And I'm saying this because I'm looking at the last time we have engaged with an international force, which is UNIFIL. And when you look at UNIFIL, there are three mistakes that we should not repeat. The first is resolution 1701 was very ambiguous. Now, ambiguity can be an asset if it is accompanied by an operational flexibility. That is not the case right now, because Israel's freedom of operation in Gaza is not full. Therefore, it can become a challenge for us, right? A burden.
Yeah.
And that is why we need to insist about specific timeline to dismantle Hamas and agreed upon criterions among all relevant partners to when do we decide that this terror organization is being dismantled. The second, UNIFIL, if you think about it, was a peacekeeping force with no peace to keep, right? And that was because the Lebanese government was controlled by Iranian. Here, the challenge is even greater because we need to establish a political alternative to Hamas from scratch, right?
Yeah.
So what we need to ensure right now is that while we are trying to maintain, tranquility in the area and dismantling Hamas with no Hamas involvement, and unfortunately, we already know that Hamas is involved or tries to be involved behind the scene.
Yeah.
And the third thing, and no less important, and we talked about tomorrow, what I'm saying now is about in 1 hour from now, we need to make sure that our operating force policy, Israel can relate and react if the force to build up actions of Hamas, even without a single bullet being shot. That, by the way, was not the case after the Second Lebanon War, which led to years of containment and understanding of Hezbollah's violation, which ended in two tents on Israeli soil just a few weeks before October 7th. Those three mistakes are Gaza.
Scholar, someone with a lot of experience in international affairs and, of course, communications. And I think you take one of the biggest failures in UN peacekeeping, UNIFIL, that really had a mandate to stop Hezbollah from arming and establishing itself close to the border with Israel. That failed abysmally. But I would add to the points that I think you make, and you make them very well, also the reporting mechanism and what kind of reality is presented to the world, whether it is channeled through the U.S. Central Command and U.S. political channels or some other mechanism. That was also one of the biggest shortcomings of UNIFIL, because they were bullied into reporting falsely about the reality on the ground. And if you would have read UN reports, and I've read hundreds of them, of 1701, you could have been at fault for mistakenly understanding. You could have been forgiven for mistakenly understanding that everything's okay in southern Lebanon on October 6th.
And
Hezbollah isn't there, and maybe a few small skirmishes.
Interestingly, if you want to take it back to the information domain, right? We talk about what we're going to do in Gaza strategically with this international force, but think about it for a second, to Gaza, and we'll see the destruction through their own eyes. Our main challenge here in the information domain was to try to label ourselves as part of the solution rather than the problem. But if you really ask me, the main challenge here does not regard, Jonathan, to the target audience of the international community. It regards to the Palestinian community. And looking 10 years ahead, a part of this huge plan that left a de-radicalization plan to ensure that the hearts and minds of Palestinian children is not incited. Yet again, otherwise, we're going to lose another generation of kids on both sides.
Which indeed is part of the 20-part plan. But as with many other things, and on this, unfortunately, we'll have to close, there's still no flesh on the bones. We still don't know exactly how, what kind of plan the White House or Israel or Egypt or the Emirates or Turkey and Qatar or anybody else that is a precondition for a different future. Gadi, it's been fascinating to talk with you, and I'm sure that we'll see you again in this or other FDD events. Thank you for coming on, Gadi Ezra, and I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thanks for staying on. Here's what the FDD experts on other topics have on tap for you today. FDD's Matt Pottinger, he published a piece in the Free Press ahead of Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping. Pottinger recalls a 2017 meeting where China's premier told Trump that Beijing would dominate the century's most important technologies, such as artificial intelligence, while America would be reduced to exporting soybeans and corn. The warning wasn't subtle. China planned to make the world dependent on its technology while turning the U.S. into an agricultural supplier. Now, as Trump prepares to meet Xi again, Pottinger argues that the stakes are whether America remains a technological superpower or becomes what China envisioned years ago. Number two, writing for the New York Post, FDD's Elaine Dezensky explains Trump's plan to break China's dangerous grip on the minerals that power modern life. Beijing today controls over 90% of the rare earth elements that go into everything from your phone to fighter jets. And Xi said China should use this control as a weapon against other countries, very bluntly. Trump's responding with a trade deal across Asia, Japan, Australia, Thailand, South Korea, and that is designed to build new supply chains that will cut China out or at least minimize their influence. And finally, FDD's Sinan Sidi and William Doran wrote in Foreign Policy about Turkey's expansion into Africa. Ankara claims it's offering African countries a better partnership than America, France, Russia, or China. And many analysts praise Turkey's growing network of embassies and diplomatic deals across the continent. The problem, Turkish weapons keep showing up in various African conflicts. And despite Erdogan's promise to bring stability and development to the continent, Sidi and Doran argue that Turkey's engagement is actually fueling violence, no less. That's all for today. If you're looking for more updated, trustworthy, and timely information, please visit our website at fdd.org or take a look through our social media accounts. Jonathan Schanzer will be back on Monday. And in the meantime, I wish you all a great weekend, and thanks for always watching and listening to what our experts have to say. I'm Jonathan Conricus, signing off for FDD.